Good afternoon to everyone. I'd love for all of you to accompany me on a walk down memory lane back to the fall of 2011. This is when I was about to start college. I was starting college at Georgia Tech in Atlanta as an industrial engineer. Ended up picking engineering only because that seemed like the logical next step to do for someone who was a science student and ended up getting good marks in his board examinations. Entered college, and being a diligent student, I always felt that I have to make the most of the $40,000 that my parents were spending on my education every single year when I was studying abroad. And I felt that I have to do well academically, because if I do well academically, then all else being equal, that maximizes my chances of getting a good job after college. It's only now, with the aid of hindsight, that I realize that the objective that I actually went in with was a very myopic objective. Come to college, work as hard as possible academically, get as high a GPA as possible, and then hope that I end up securing a good job. And I was actually very successful in this myopic objective of mine. I had a 4.0 GPA, 3.9 to be precise. Ended up getting a job for myself at Deutsche Bank after finishing college. From Deutsche Bank, moved on to Goldman Sachs, and worked in investment banking as well as sales and trading for 3 years across both Deutsche Bank as well as Goldman Sachs. With the aid of hindsight, though, I realized that I didn't make the most of the $40,000 that my parents were spending on my education. Instead, I think a lot of it, if not most of it, went down the drain. And I'm terribly apologetic to my parents for this. It's because I realize now that college is a lot more than you simply spending all-nighters at the library studying in a bid to get as high a GPA as possible. I think college is a time when you also become a lot more aware of yourself. And in order for you to actually enhance your self-awareness, you have to enhance the relationship that you have with yourself. In other words, you end up spending more time with yourself, which is only possible if you actually take a break from all the doing and studying on a daily basis, and sometimes sit down and just think, as daunting, as challenging, as dark as the process of simply thinking might be. And I think for all of you currently in college, you'll have the privilege of that broad exposure where you can actually study multiple disciplines as an undergrad, as a postgrad student. You might come in with lots of preconceived notions that this is the path that I've set out for myself because of what I've thought for myself, as well as because of external influences. And so I have to stick to this path. But I think now is the time for a lot of you to stop, rethink, reassess, and potentially recalibrate as well based upon the strategizing and the thinking that you've done. And so take advantage of the broad opportunities, the multiple disciplines that you're exposed to at Ashoka University. And I say this because this is something that I would definitely tell a younger Anubhav, a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old Anubhav who is entering college. I was successful with my myopic objective, as I said, worked in investment banking and sales and trading for 3 years. And then, as luck may have it, I didn't end up getting my H-1B visa, which is the work permit that you require to work in the United States as an international. You get 3 attempts. All 3 of my attempts were unsuccessful. So after 3 years of working there, I had to come back to India. When I came back to India, instead of actually continuing with my pedal to the metal approach, uncharacteristically, I actually thought about taking a break, and I spent 6 months on the sidelines, not doing anything, and probably for the first time in my life, taking an extended break and just thinking and being. And that's when I realized that 6-month break that I took served as a gap year or a gap half year that I wish I had taken before college, when I wasn't quite sure as to what I truly wanted to be doing, but simply did something because that seemed like the logical next step on paper, or perhaps because most of my friends were picking engineering, my friends from my science classes back in high school. And that 6-month fallow period, if I may call it that, truly opened my eyes to what my true skills are, what my strengths are, and what is it that truly makes me feel alive. based upon that assessment that I had and the self-therapy that I went through, I ended up pivoting to a different career as a writer and a presenter, which is how I currently ply my trade as well. But at the time that I was making that pivot, it was far from easy for more reasons than one. The biggest challenge for me personally was actually discarding the identity that I had that was weighing me down as a Goldman Sachs investment banker. Because if you think about the title of Goldman Sachs investment banker, to a lot of people, it sounds like a very sexy title. And that's exactly what the case was for me as well. And perhaps presenter and writer, to me and to a lot of people in my fraternity, wasn't as sexy as Goldman Sachs investment banker was. And because I was so attached to that identity, detaching myself from it took a lot of work. Not to mention the fact that being gregarious and being social animals, we always do look for validation no matter how self-assured we might be. And sometimes when you see your loved ones to whom you're very attached, having well-intentioned opinions or suggestions that might actually run counter to what you might have in your mind, it sometimes does affect you and makes you doubt your own judgment. And that's exactly what the case was for me as well. But then a couple of things really helped me. One was I actually reminded myself of my why. Why was it that I was choosing to pivot to a different field altogether? And I think those 6 months that I spent on the sidelines thinking and reflecting really helped me home in or zero in on what my why was. And constant reminders of that why truly helped. The other being the fact that I told myself, if there is a toss-up between short-term validation versus long-term fulfillment, what exactly do you want to be picking here? Because as the Bible says as well, for what shall it profit a man if he wins the whole world, but then he ends up losing his own soul in the process? Another quote that I came across that in fact I still remind myself of even now, whenever I might be doubting myself, whenever I'm thinking twice about embarking upon something that might have an element of risk that's involved, is a quote from a Swiss film director. And it goes, "He who jumps into the void owes no explanation to those who stand and watch." And I just felt that I'd rather be a player who's out there in the middle, taking that risk, as opposed to being a mere spectator on the sidelines, who's perhaps passing comments or laughing at the players who have the gumption to be out there in the middle, taking that risk. And so I think some of these reminders really helped me get that divorce from that identity that I was so severely attached to. Another big challenge that I faced was something that Sir spoke about as well, which is the sunk cost fallacy. Because I'd already spent those 3 years working in finance, I felt that it would be challenging, exhausting to disembark the mountain that I'd already climbed and actually embark upon a new mountain altogether. Not to mention the fact that you will compare your journey and where you lie in your respective journey to where your friends and peers lie who graduated at the same time as you did. And you might feel as if they might continue their ascent, but you'd have to disembark the mountain that you're currently climbing and then start from scratch once again. And so that was very difficult for me. But I just knew that if I can actually climb the mountain that truly has my name written on it, in the long term, I will end up outpacing others who might be climbing the wrong mountain. That's not meant for them, but others who probably did not have the courage to disembark that mountain, despite knowing that this is not probably what their calling is in the long term. And so I wanted to be long-term greedy here, as opposed to being short-term greedy. Not to mention the fact that I actually looked at this as an opportunity for me to be painting a blank canvas from scratch, which can be very exciting. Take yourself back to your childhood. When you were a child, when you came across a novel gadget, let's say a Lego set, and you didn't quite know what this was, you have this childlike curiosity. You start tinkering with it. You start playing with it. Slowly but surely you figure it out. And you look at life, you look at gadgets, you look at everything novel that you come across with a sense of wonder, a sense of awe. The uncertain excites you. as opposed to the uncertain being threatening to you. And I tried reminding myself that this is a perfect opportunity for you to cultivate that childlike curiosity again and start from scratch with a beginner's mindset, with mental fluidity. Because a child isn't encumbered by preconceived notions, by the paralyzing fear of judgments. Now, all of that said and done, of course, you want to be strategic about some of these risks that you take. In other words, you want to take calculated risks. Like, one of the reasons I was able to make this pivot is because I had some savings under my belt because of the 3 years that I'd worked in investment banking. And so whenever you're dealing with or contending with uncertainty in your life or instability in your life, I think it's very important for you to have some anchors or some sources of stability. That could be a financial cushion that could serve as an anchor, but it could be stability in other forms or anchors in other forms, say loved ones, or anything else that's a constant in your life that you can always go back to for comfort, for solace, for certainty, that acts as an antidote to the uncertainty or the instability that you're going to be experiencing. Now, when exactly do you know that it's time for me to actually shut up shop, call it quits on what I'm currently doing and try pivoting to something else? The answer isn't formulaic, because if the answer was formulaic, then I wouldn't be standing here. We wouldn't be having this TEDx talk talking about uncertainty, talking about embracing discomfort or making the comfortable uncomfortable. To each their own, different strokes for different folks, but a few mental models or a few questions that I asked myself that have really helped me. Number one, is this something that makes me feel at the peak of my being? Is this something that truly makes me feel alive? Another question that I asked myself is this something that I can be the best in the world at? So keep redefining what you do until this becomes true. Something else that I feel I underestimated initially was not having given something enough time. And this can work both ways. Sometimes you might be hooked to something, but it might simply turn out to be an infatuation. Maybe 6 months down the line, you don't have the same fascination with the thing that you were hooked onto. In which case, if it's not going to be something enthralling for you 6 months down the line, then it's probably not something that is your calling or something that you want to pursue long term. But sometimes the opposite might happen as well. You start something right now, maybe it doesn't seem all that promising to you. Let's just say you get a job after college, you start the job, the first month in that job isn't all that exciting. You don't enjoy it all that much. Because we're in the age of instant gratification, sometimes we think about calling it quits prematurely. But if you stick it out for maybe 6 to 8 months, perhaps even a year, things might actually improve and you might be able to turn a corner. And so give it some time before making a judgment, as opposed to having a knee-jerk reaction based upon how you feel today. Because today, you might not be feeling neutral. Maybe you've had a bad day. Maybe you woke up from the wrong side of the bed, as a result of which you might be more biased towards negativity, towards saying no, towards seeing things through a negative filter. Or on the other hand, sometimes you end up getting carried away by positive emotions as well. You've had an excellent day, and although it might be the right decision for you to call it quits, you might end up feeling that no, things are not as bad as they seem, only because you're getting carried away by that surge of positivity or positive emotions that you might be experiencing at that point of time. But after you've actually given it some thought with a neutral frame of mind, neither too high nor too low, and you still feel that the thing that you're doing isn't answering some of the questions that I spoke about initially. Is this something that truly makes me feel alive? Is this something I can be the best in the world at? Then I think it might be time for you to swallow your ego, swallow your pride, and pivot to something else, as difficult as that might be. Because, as Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And so get rid of the blinkers that you might have, that this is exactly what I want to be doing, because sometimes when you get rid of the blinkers, you actually observe what lies in the periphery. And when you observe what lies in the periphery, you might actually notice something that wasn't quite your intention initially, but that turns out to be the source of magic for you in your life, be it your personal life or your professional life. It's okay if you truly know what you want to be doing. Let's say a Cristiano Ronaldo or a Virat Kohli, they know their singular focus is football and cricket respectively. But if you're someone who's still figuring it out, I think operating like a horse with blinkers, with tunnel vision, is a fool's game, because you might miss out on what lies on the side or the periphery. Have that mental fluidity that a child has, that a beginner has, that an amateur has. Oftentimes we think about the word amateur as having a negative connotation, but the word amateur comes from the Latin word amare, which means to do something for the love of it, which is exactly what a child does something for the love of it. Work like an athlete. In other words, you train, you sprint, but after every sprint, you rest and reassess before actually embarking upon your next sprint, as opposed to constantly sprinting. And make sure that you're impatient with actions and experiments, but patient with results. And I'm saying this to you as well as a note to myself. You do all of this, in 15 years' time is when you'll finally end up becoming an overnight success. Thank you.